In a manufacturing environment, situations may arise that would require you to disassemble a manufactured item. For example, you may need components from a produced item to fulfill an expedited order, or an item may have been built incorrectly or damaged, so you may want to break down the item to use the components elsewhere, or you may have a purchased item that has been altered or can't be returned that you need to disassemble in order to salvage its component parts. Whatever the reason, Sage 100 ERP has a bill of materials disassembly function that will relieve inventory of a parent item and return its components to either inventory, to a vendor, or to scrap. In this tutorial, we're going to demonstrate two disassembly examples. The first will involve disassembly of an item that was produced correctly and we only want to return the components to inventory. In this example, the disassembly will not account for yield or miscellaneous items. The second will involve disassembly of a previously posted production entry where we mistakenly entered the wrong item actually produced and therefore want to reverse the entire production entry. In this example, the disassembly will account for yield or miscellaneous items. Before we begin the disassembly process, let's review the bill of materials for the item that we're going to disassemble. From the menu tree, we'll select Bill of Materials, Main, Bill of Materials Maintenance. Using the lookup, we'll select board 04230. The revision defaults to the current revision number 000. Using the lookup, notice there's also a revision 001. The revision field is only available if the Use Bill Revision Codes checkbox is selected in the Bill of Materials setup options. It's important to select the revision used to create the item in inventory in order to properly reverse the transaction. We'll leave our revision as the default 000. Reviewing this item, notice on the header that there is a yield percentage of 95%. Moving to the Lines tab, note that there are 3 component items and 1 miscellaneous item. The miscellaneous item represents a cost for labor. This information is important to know so that you select the proper disassembly type if you want to reverse the labor charges and account for the yield percentage. So now that we're familiar with the item to be disassembled, let's get underway with our first example. To begin, we'll go to the Task menu tree and select Disassembly Entry. Here we'll click the Next Number button to obtain the next disassembly number, and we'll accept the default date. Next, we'll open the bill number lookup and select board 04230 motherboard. The revision defaults to the current revision number, but you can click the lookup to select a different revision to disassemble, but we'll accept the default. Again, it's important to select the correct revision number used to create the item in inventory in order to properly reverse the transaction. Next, we'll enter a quantity of 1 to disassemble and accept the default effective date. The system will include all engineering changes through the date specified when disassembling the item. Moving to Parent Warehouse, we'll open the lookup and select 002, which is the location of the finished product. For Component Warehouse, we'll use 000, which is our default warehouse to return the components. The warehouse can be overridden for individual components if necessary. Disassembly type has 3 options. Produced item is selected to disassemble a manufactured item. This type does not include any miscellaneous charges, scrap, or yield percentages that were associated with manufacture of the item. Purchased item is used to disassemble a purchased item in order to salvage its component parts. And production reversal is used to reverse previously posted production entries. This type of disassembly factors in scrap and yield percentages and the miscellaneous charges associated with the original bill. Again, in this example, we'll assume that production of the item was done correctly, and we only want to return the components to inventory. Accordingly, we'll select Produced Item as our disassembly type. Moving to Explode Subassemblies, this should be checked if you need to disassemble the components of any subassemblies in addition to the parent item. In our example, we're disassembling the parent item only, so we'll leave it unchecked. Clicking over to the Lines tab, you can see that the items have been automatically entered based on the bill of materials. Note the caution symbol on line 2. This indicates that it's either a lot or serialized item that requires distribution. In order to continue, we'll need to click on the lot/serial number distribution icon to assign the lot or serial number to the item being returned to inventory. Using the lookup, we'll select lot number 50105 for our distribution and click OK. If this were a serialized item, we would enter the appropriate serial number. Note that you can change the warehouse for individual lines, amend quantities, and enter additional lines including inventory, miscellaneous charges, and comments. It's also important to mention some facts about item costs. When using the disassembly function, you should be aware of the costing that will be used and that there may be differences that post to an adjustment account depending on the item's valuation method. The cost on the lines is defaulted to standard cost for standard cost items, average cost for average cost items, or last cost for items using FIFO, LIFO, lot, or serial valuation. Importantly, cost can be overridden during data entry. Also, when a parent item is relieved from inventory, it is valued at its actual cost. If this amount differs from the accumulated costs of all components, the difference will be posted to the adjustment account that you set up in product line maintenance. We won't be making any changes, so we'll click Accept to save the disassembly entry for our first example. After we complete the second example, we'll print and run the disassembly register, which will update the entries to the permanent files. For the second example, we'll disassemble a previously posted production entry that will account for yield, scrap, and miscellaneous items. So we'll click the Number button to obtain the next disassembly entry number and accept the default disassembly date. Using the lookup, we'll select the same item as our previous example, board 04230. Again, we'll use the default revision 000, enter a quantity of 1, and use the default date as our effective date. As in our previous example, we'll use the lookup to select 002 as the parent warehouse to relieve the finished item and leave the default warehouse 000 as the location to distribute the components. In this example, we'll assume that we entered the wrong item actually produced and therefore want to reverse the entire production entry. Accordingly, we'll choose Production Reversal for the disassembly type and leave Explode Subassemblies deselected. Now let's open the Lines tab. As in our first example, the lines are automatically populated. Notice that the quantities in this entry are higher to account for the 95% yield. Again, we'll select line 2 and click the lot serial number distribution icon. Using the lookup, we'll select lot number 50105 and click OK. Notice that on line 4, we have a miscellaneous charge code that was not on the first example. Charge codes will only be pulled into the lines for disassemblies that are production reversals. Let's accept this entry and click the printer icon to start the disassembly register. The register must be printed before the disassembly entries can be updated to the permanent files. The bill of materials posting date defaults to the current system date, which we'll accept, and for demo purposes, we'll click Preview to review the register. Here we'll review and compare our two examples, starting with the first example, disassembly number 28. You'll notice that the first entry on the register includes the bill number, quantity, warehouse of the parent item that is being relieved, and that the disassembly type is a produced item. The next set of data on the register details the component item codes, warehouse, quantities, and costs that will be placed into inventory and the accounts for the GL posting. In order to compare the second example, disassembly number 29, we'll overlay it below the first example. The first entry is the same as number 28, except the disassembly type is a production reversal. The next set of data on the register includes the same components as our first example. However, because a production reversal factors in scrap and yield percentages, the quantities and costs of the components are automatically adjusted. Further, the miscellaneous code that was part of the original bill is also included. As you can see, it's important to use the appropriate disassembly type in order to accurately update inventory costs and quantities and to properly account for these changes in your general ledger. After reviewing your entries for accuracy, you can continue the disassembly register update process. And that completes our demonstration of the Bill of Materials disassembly function. Give us a call if you need assistance with this or any other feature in your Sage 100 ERP system. Well, that's it for this tutorial. Bye for now.